I hadn't realized how tired I was until I heard my daughter's voice on the phone. Amelia's words were sharp like a million tiny cuts, each one deeper than the last. She spoke casually as though she were asking me to pick up some groceries for her. "Mom, I need you to organize the gala for my new fashion line. It's in 2 weeks and you know how you handle events." It was just one more thing, one more demand. I gripped the receiver tighter, feeling the familiar ache in my chest, an ache that had been there for years, growing and twisting with each request, each favor, each expectation. "Amelia, I'm 68 years old," I said, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room and let it shatter into a million pieces, but I didn't. I was always calm, always measured. The perfect mother, the perfect employee, the perfect woman. "I'm not your event planner. I've worked my whole life slaved, really, and now you want me to be at your beck and call." She didn't hear me, or if she did, she didn't care. "It's just a gala, Mom. You've done this 1,000 times. You know I've got the launch to focus on. I'm stretched thin and Mark's parents are coming into town too. It's really no big deal. I'm sure you can handle it. You always do." The words stung more than they should have. I'd heard them before, after all. I'd heard them for 35 years, and still it hurt. It always did. The casual dismissal, the way she made me feel like I was simply an extension of her plans, like I didn't have my own life, my own wants, my own needs, and the worst part was she was right. I had handled it. I always did. I had given up so much of myself, so much of my life, that I didn't know who I was anymore. I had learned to live for others. First for Robert, my late husband, who died too young, leaving me to raise Amelia on my own. Then for Amelia, who I swore would never feel the absence of a father, whose every dream I helped build, even if it meant crushing my own along the way. It was never about me. It was always about them, about making sure they were happy, comfortable, successful. And in the end, I had nothing left. No dreams, no time, no sense of who I was outside of the roles they handed me. I wanted to tell her that, to scream it at her, to let her know how much I had sacrificed. I wanted to shout that I was a person, not just a function in her life, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned against the kitchen counter, closing my eyes, letting the words roll off my back like they always did. "Fine," I said, my voice a quiet whisper. "I'll handle it." As I set the phone down, I felt the weight of the years pressing down on me. This was my life now. The quiet sacrifices, the endless chores, the invisible weight I carried, the endless requests. I had become so good at this, at giving everything of myself, that I had stopped asking if I wanted to. I had stopped thinking about what I needed, what I wanted. Every corner of my life was someone else's, and I didn't know how to get it back, how to take back even a sliver of my time, my soul, how to remember who I was before I was Mom. The kitchen, which I had spent years keeping spotless and perfect, suddenly felt suffocating. The pots and pans which I had used to prepare countless meals for my family seemed like chains pulling me down. This was where it all happened. This was where I had cooked, cleaned, waited, loved. This was where I had been needed, where I had been everything to everyone. I remembered the early days when Robert was alive, how we used to joke about the life we'd build together, how I had put aside my own ambitions to be by his side, how he had supported me until he didn't anymore, how I had thrown myself into motherhood after his death, determined to give Amelia the best life I could, even if it meant giving up my own. I had done it willingly. But now, after all these years, it felt like too much, like I had given everything, and in return, I had been forgotten. The phone rang again. It was Amelia, of course. I could hear the urgency in her voice, but I didn't want to pick it up. Not this time, not yet. I needed a moment to breathe, to think. But she persisted. "Mom, you still there?" She didn't even let me answer. I'll get Mark to call you about the catering details. You know how picky his family is. We need it to be perfect, and I trust you'll make it perfect like you always do." I couldn't take it anymore. My hands shook as I picked up the phone as though the simple act of answering was a declaration of surrender. "Amelia," I said, trying to steady my voice, but the words came out colder than I intended. "I need a break, a real break, from everything, from you, from Mark, from this life that's been planned for me." There was a long pause on the other end, a silence that stretched until it was unbearable. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Amelia's voice was now tinged with confusion then defensiveness. "You can't be serious. You've always been there for me. Why would you do this now?" I closed my eyes, feeling the tears pricking at the corners. For the first time in years, I thought about what I wanted, what I needed, and it wasn't this. It wasn't living for everyone else. "I'm going on a trip," I said softly, the words foreign and foreign to my own ears. "I'm going to take a break, Amelia. I need to find myself again. I've lost too much of who I am." And as I said the words, I realized I meant them. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just answering to someone else's needs. I wasn't just performing a role. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't an employee. I was me, and I was going to fight for the person I used to be, the person I had left behind. The phone went silent again, but this time I didn't wait for her to respond. I hung up, my heart racing in my chest. It wasn't fear I felt. It was something else, something new, a glimmer of hope. It was time for me to step away, to walk away from the expectations, the demands, the never-ending cycle of sacrifice. And maybe this time I'd start living for myself. I don't know what I was expecting when I made the decision to take that trip. Maybe I thought I would feel a sense of relief, a lightness that would wash over me like a cool breeze. But when I woke up the next morning, the weight of the world didn't feel any different. It was as though the decision to leave to stop being the sacrificial mother had placed a heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. My body ached from years of bending, breaking and stretching to meet everyone else's needs. I had always been the one who held things together. Now, as I packed my bag, I couldn't shake the sense that the very act of putting myself first felt almost wrong. The morning passed in a blur of packing lists and the final touches of preparation. I sat in front of my mirror, staring at my reflection, wondering when I had started to look so tired. The lines on my face seemed deeper than they were yesterday, as though the years had rushed in all at once to meet me. I was supposed to be leaving for some sort of adventure, yet all I felt was the hollow emptiness of a life I'd been forced to lead for far too long. I picked up my passport from the nightstand. It had been sitting there for months, gathering dust untouched, until I renewed it earlier this year, convinced that maybe, just maybe, I would finally go somewhere. Somewhere that wasn't about catering to someone else's needs. Somewhere I could exist just as I was, with no one asking me to fill a role. It felt surreal in my hands, as though the person who had dreamed of this trip, the woman who had wanted to explore the world and see things beyond the limits of her little family circle, had died years ago. But now in this moment, I was her again. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, willing the courage to stay with me. There was no turning back. I needed this trip more than anything else in the world. But as I placed the passport in my bag and zipped it shut, I felt the familiar anxiety creeping back. What if I regretted this? What if once I left, things fell apart? What if Amelia called and begged me to come home? What if Mark needed me to fix something for him again? It was too late to turn back now. I had made up my mind. I walked out of my apartment, leaving behind the space that had once been my sanctuary, but which now felt like a prison. I hadn't felt free in years. The city outside felt colder than usual, but maybe it was just me. I had lived in this concrete jungle for so long, been surrounded by its noise, its busyness, its constant demand for attention that it felt suffocating. And here I was, running away from it all. The airport was a blur of rushing bodies, security checks, and the hum of endless conversations I couldn't understand. I felt as though I had stepped out of one world and into another. I could feel the slight tremor of excitement creeping up my spine, but I quickly buried it as though it was some forbidden thing that couldn't be trusted. It wasn't until I reached the gate and saw the flight attendants boarding the plane that I realized I had done it. I was leaving the life I had built around others, leaving the obligations that had bound me, leaving behind my daughter, my son-in-law, my role as the ever-available mother. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't guilt. It was a strange sense of exhilaration. Freedom, maybe. I boarded the plane, found my seat, and settled in. The plane lifted off, and as the ground below me became a patchwork of city blocks and streets, I felt the smallest crack in the armor I had built around myself for all these years. The guilt, the familiar pull to check my phone to see if I had missed a call, began to fade away. I glanced out the window, the vast expanse of sky stretching before me like a canvas, and I allowed myself to smile. But that first night in Paris was harder than I had anticipated. The hotel was beautiful, a small, charming place on the edge of Montmartre. The windows overlooked cobblestone streets lined with cafes and little boutiques. It was everything I had imagined, a quiet escape from the noise of my old life. But when I stepped into the room, the silence hit me in waves. There was no one asking for favors, no one telling me how to arrange the dinner table or what to wear for the gala. The only voice I heard was my own, and it felt like a stranger. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space around me. The weight of being alone settled into my bones like cold stone. I realized that I didn't know how to be alone. Not like this. Sure, I had spent hours working late at the office, retreating into my job as a means of escape, but I had never truly been alone in this sense. Without Amelia needing something, without Mark asking for money, without the constant pull of family demands that were so ingrained in me that I had forgotten what it was like to be Victoria, just Victoria, without the labels. The hours passed slowly, and I found myself walking the streets, aimlessly exploring the city. I hadn't seen a single landmark yet, but I didn't mind. The streets of Paris had a rhythm to them, a melody of sounds I had never really noticed before. The clink of cups in cafes, the hum of conversations in foreign tongues, the laughter of strangers passing by. It was the kind of noise I had never given myself permission to listen to. I walked past art galleries, street musicians, and flower shops, each one offering a new experience that I had never taken the time to explore. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a small art studio tucked away behind a busy street that I stopped. The sign read, Atelier de Peinture, and without thinking, I walked inside. The smell of oil paint and wood greeted me, and I inhaled deeply, feeling a sense of peace wash over me that I hadn't felt in years. The artist behind the counter, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled warmly as I approached. "Do you paint?" she asked, her accent heavy but gentle. I paused, surprised by the question. "I used to," I said quietly, "a long time ago." Her eyes sparkled as if she could see the truth behind my words. "Come," she said, gesturing to the easel in the corner. "Pick up a brush. Paint your soul." I stood there for a moment, unsure, but then something inside me stirred. Maybe it was the solitude of Paris, or maybe it was just the growing realization that I had been too afraid to even try for so long. Without another word, I picked up a brush. The strokes came slowly, at first tentative. But as the colors began to take shape on the canvas, I felt something inside me crack open, something I had closed off long ago. I wasn't a mother, I wasn't a worker, I wasn't a caretaker. I was me, and I had forgotten how to be me. For the first time in years, I felt the familiar spark of creativity, the spark that had once lit up my life. And for the first time, I allowed myself to embrace it, to feel it grow and spread through me, reminding me of the woman I had been before life had pulled me into its demands. The trip wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about rediscovering myself, the parts of me that I had buried under the weight of everyone else's expectations. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me or what would happen when I returned. But in that small art studio in Paris, with a brush in my hand and the world around me bustling with life, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. I felt alive. I had been in Paris for 3 days before it truly hit me. I wasn't just escaping my responsibilities, I was learning to live for myself again. The realization felt like a jolt to my system, as if a switch had been flipped in my brain. I had walked through the city gazing at paintings, savoring the simple joy of sitting in a cafe reading a book without interruption and allowing my thoughts to wander without guilt or urgency. But somewhere in the quiet of my hotel room, far from the noise of my old life, a thought began to creep into my mind, a thought that would change everything. I hadn't spoken to Amelia since I left. I didn't expect to. But it had been 3 days, and the silence between us felt like a wall I couldn't ignore anymore. I had promised myself that I wouldn't let guilt drive me back home, that I wouldn't fall into the trap of being needed again. But what if I wasn't needed at all? What if my absence didn't matter to anyone, least of all, Amelia? What if they didn't care that I was gone? I tried to push the thought away, but it gnawed at me as the hours passed. It wasn't until the 4th night that I finally gave in. I pulled my phone out of my bag, hesitated, and then dialed Amelia's number. The ringing felt like a hammer in my chest, each ring echoing louder than the last, until finally she picked up. Mom. Her voice was sharp, almost frantic. "Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you. Why haven't you picked up your phone?" "Mark is losing his mind. He says you're abandoning us." The words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt a familiar tightness in my throat. My own daughter accusing me of abandonment. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "Amelia," I said, my voice steady but distant. "I'm fine. I'm exactly where I need to be." "Where you need to be?" she echoed, her tone laced with disbelief. "You need to be here, Mom. We need you. You promised you would help with the gala. We can't do this without you. I'm freaking out, and you're off somewhere in Paris, living like you've never had responsibilities in your life." The words stung in ways I hadn't prepared for. The weight of them settled in the pit of my stomach like lead. I felt like I was being crushed under the burden of her guilt, her anger, not my own. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly as I leaned against the wall. "I didn't promise anything, Amelia. You made that assumption, not me. I told you I needed a break, and I did. I'm living, Amelia. I'm finally living for myself. You're an adult now. It's time for you to handle your own life without relying on me. Mom, you're being selfish," she said, her voice trembling with anger and something else. Fear. "Maybe you've always been there for me. You've always fixed everything. And now, when we need you the most, you just leave. You don't get to do that. I don't get to do this without you. You're my mom." The tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them. Not because of what she said, but because of the way she said it. It was like I had become the enemy for doing something I had never done before, taking care of myself. "I am your mom," I said, my voice cracking. "But I'm also me, Amelia. And for the first time in decades, I'm not going to put my life on hold for you or anyone else." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and when Amelia spoke again, her voice was quieter, as though she had started to understand at least a little. I don't understand. You've always been there. You've always put everyone else first. How can you just walk away from everything?" "Because I'm tired, Amelia. I'm tired of always being the one to give. Tired of always being the one who has to fix everything, who has to sacrifice. Don't you see, I've spent my whole life living for you, living for your father, living for Mark, for everyone but me. And now I'm taking the time to finally figure out who I am, who Victoria is outside of being a mother, a wife, a caretaker. The words felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders, and for the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for needing time for myself. But Amelia wasn't done yet. What about Mark? What about the gala? What about me? She repeated, her voice trembling again, not with anger, but with something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. I let out a long breath, wiping the tears from my face, trying to gather myself. I had to stop the cycle, even if it was hard. Amelia, I've done more than enough for all of you. I've given you everything. I've put my life on hold to make sure you never felt alone, to make sure your father's death didn't break you. But I can't keep doing that. I can't keep sacrificing myself for you or for anyone. I'm not just a mother. I'm not just your caretaker. I am a person, and I deserve to live my life for once. I can't fix everything for you anymore, and I'm not going to apologize for that. There was another long pause. I almost thought she had hung up, but then her voice came soft and uncertain. I don't know if I'm ready to handle all this by myself, Mom. You've always been the one to clean up the mess. What if I can't handle it? I wanted to reach through the phone and pull her into my arms. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that I would always be there for her. But I couldn't do that anymore. You will handle it, Amelia, because you're strong, you're capable, and you've learned from the best. But now it's time for you to stand on your own. I believe in you, and I need you to believe in yourself, too. Another silence, but this one wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with something else. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the first seed of understanding. I don't know what to say, she said quietly. You don't need to say anything, Amelia. Just think about it. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just living. I paused. I'm living for me for the first time in my life. We hung up and I sat there for a long time, the weight of our conversation still pressing on my chest. I wasn't sure if anything had changed. I wasn't sure if Amelia would ever understand why I had to go. But for the first time in decades, I didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt on my shoulders. I had done something for myself, and in the process, I had stopped being a mere function in someone else's life. I glanced out the window of my hotel room, the lights of Paris twinkling in the distance. It wasn't the end of my journey, it was just the beginning. And no matter how hard it would be, I had finally taken the first step toward living for myself. The next few days in Paris unfolded like a slow, gentle unraveling, like a tapestry being slowly undone, thread by thread. I had made the decision to live for myself, but now that I was here in this city, that had always felt like a dream, I found that I had no real idea of what that even meant. Sure, the superficial things were easy to enjoy: the wine, the food, the soft hum of the city that seemed to say, you belong here too. But the deeper things, the ones that tugged at my heart, the ones that whispered, who are you really? Those were harder to face. I spent the next day wandering the streets, but I wasn't just walking aimlessly through Paris. I was walking through the years of my life, every step a reminder of the person I had become and the person I had left behind. The cobblestone streets felt ancient, as though they had borne witness to countless stories, some long forgotten others still echoing in the air. In the shops, I could see the glimmer of art paintings and sculptures that told stories of people who had dared to express themselves, to live for their own vision. I wanted that. I wanted to stop living in the margins, to stop being someone else's background, noise, their support system, their caretaker. I made my way to the Seine, walking along its banks as the city hummed with life around me. The river sparkled under the soft light of the early evening, and I found a quiet spot on a bench, watching the boats glide by their passengers, carefree and alive. I had never been carefree. I had always been the one to shoulder the weight. But in this moment, I realized how much I had missed out on how much I had buried to play the role of the ever-giving mother, the tireless provider. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think of Amelia. I hadn't heard from her since that last phone call, and part of me was afraid that she was still angry, still hurt by my absence. I knew she had every right to be. She had been raised in a world where I was always there, where my identity was wrapped up in the roles I played. It wasn't her fault. She had never known me as anything but her mother, and now suddenly I wasn't just her mother anymore. I was Victoria, an individual with her own life, her own desires. I wasn't sure if she could handle that. I wasn't even sure if I could. I picked up my phone. The screen was filled with unread messages, mostly from Amelia, a few from Mark, all of them demanding my attention, needing my approval, expecting my response. But I ignored them. For the first time, I didn't feel that overwhelming sense of obligation to reply. I wasn't their lifeline anymore. I didn't owe them anything, not in the way I had always believed I did. The next day, I ventured further into the city, discovering new streets, new faces, and new corners of myself I didn't know existed. I wandered through a small art gallery where I saw a collection of abstract paintings that made my heart beat a little faster. They spoke to me in a way words never could. I found a quiet corner and sat down, soaking in the color and form, the raw emotion each piece conveyed. It was as though the artists had poured their souls into the canvas, and I wanted to do that too, to pour my soul into something that was just mine, not defined by anyone else's needs or expectations. I wondered if I had been doing that all along, only in the wrong places. Perhaps my sacrifices had been a form of art too, but it had been a silent art, an unacknowledged one, and it had left me hollow. I felt something inside me begin to shift. It wasn't immediate, but it was there, a faint, unfamiliar stirring. It was the beginning of something new. I walked out of the gallery and into a small cafe where I ordered a coffee and settled into a corner with my journal. I had never been much of a writer, never really given myself the space to put my thoughts down on paper. But now in this new life I was crafting, I wanted to give myself that space. I wanted to speak my truth, to express what had been buried for so long. I didn't know what would come of it, but it felt important, vital even to start. I took out my pen and began to write. I have spent my whole life being needed, for everyone else's needs, for their wants, for their desires. I never realized how much I had lost in the process. The woman I used to be, the woman who had dreams, who had passions, who had something to offer outside of her role as a mother, a wife, a caretaker. She disappeared long ago, and I let her. I let the world take her piece by piece until there was nothing left but the shell of a woman who was only ever expected to give, to serve, to be selfless. As I wrote, I felt a rush of emotions flood through me. Regret, anger, grief, but also relief. I had been carrying all of it inside for so long, and now as I wrote it out, I could see the weight of it lifting. I was finally acknowledging it. I was finally saying it out loud in the way that only I could. But now I'm here, in Paris, in a place that isn't defined by anyone else's expectations of me. I am finally learning to live for myself. I am learning to see who I am, without the roles, without the obligations. I don't know what this means yet, but I know it means something. I know it means I am not just someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's worker. I am me. I put the pen down and leaned back, looking out the window at the city, the people walking by, each of them lost in their own stories. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to myself, at least. I felt a sense of peace settle into my chest. The storm inside me was calming. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself or apologize for what I was doing. I was doing something for me, and that was enough. But as I closed my journal and prepared to leave, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was Amelia. I hesitated before answering, my heart fluttering with both excitement and trepidation. What would she say? Would she finally understand? Or would she lash out again, accusing me of abandoning her? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. I took a deep breath and answered, "Amelia? Mom." She said, her voice softer than it had been during our last conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about what you're doing, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you've sacrificed, how much you've given. I never really saw it. I thought you'd always be there for me, and I've taken that for granted." Her voice cracked, and I could hear the sincerity in it. "I don't want you to feel like you have to do everything for me. I don't want you to lose yourself in the process." I closed my eyes, feeling a lump form in my throat. For the first time in a long time, I felt like she truly understood. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to let me go, to let me be me. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she continued. "I know this is hard for you, but I'm proud of you. I want you to be happy." And in that moment, I realized something important. Amelia was right. I had spent so many years giving sacrificing living for everyone else that I had forgotten how to be happy for myself. But now I was finally starting to learn. I smiled softly, tears welling up in my eyes. "Thank you, Amelia. That means everything to me." As we hung up, I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. The woman who had boarded that plane to Paris was not the same woman who was now standing on the streets of the city, free to be whoever she wanted to be. I had finally found the freedom I had been searching for, and that was enough. The days that followed felt like a slow blossoming, an unfolding that I had no words for, no way to express the quiet joy that began to permeate my life. I had always thought of happiness as something I needed to work toward, to sacrifice, for something I had to earn through endless giving and enduring the expectations of others. But now, in this stillness, in this new space I had carved out for myself, I realized that happiness wasn't something to be worked for. It was something to be allowed. The first few days after our conversation felt surreal. Amelia's apology, though overdue, was a bridge I had desperately needed. I had spent so much of my life feeling invisible, as though I were just the background noise in everyone else's narrative. But as I sat in my hotel room looking at the world outside my window, I finally felt seen. Not by anyone else, but by myself. I had been hidden from my own heart, from the parts of me that once had dreams, desires, and goals beyond the duties of motherhood and wifehood. Now those parts were waking up tentatively, slowly, and I was letting them stretch. For the first time in decades, I was giving myself permission to live. I spent the next few days walking through the heart of Paris, rediscovering a world I had abandoned long ago. It was as if the city was welcoming me back. I went to art galleries, wandered through parks, sat in cafes, letting the hours drift by like the gentle ripples of the Seine. I would never forget the first time I sat alone in a cafe and realized that I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. No one was waiting for me. No one was demanding anything of me. For the first time in my life, I was just being not doing. The city had a way of speaking to me, of reminding me that I didn't have to fit into anyone else's mold. The paintings, the street musicians, the architecture, it all felt like an invitation. I was being invited to rediscover the parts of me I had forgotten existed. And so I did, slowly, gently. One evening, I found myself in Montmartre sitting on a small bench near the Sacré-Cœur, gazing out over the city. The sun had just set, and the sky was bathed in a soft, golden light, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. As I sat there, the quiet hum of the city's evening life filling my ears, I realized something that took me by surprise. The city had become a mirror, not just Paris, but the life I was beginning to create. For so many years, I had been a shadow in my own life, living for others, living for their approval. But now, as I looked out over the city, I could see myself clearly, my reflection not in the eyes of others, but in my own. And that was enough. I spent that evening at a small bistro, drinking wine and nibbling on bread, staring out at the illuminated streets. It wasn't the wine that made me feel free. It was the silence, the peace, the ability to be with myself without any expectations. I wasn't anyone's mother, anyone's caretaker, anyone's worker. I was just me. And in that moment, I felt a sense of fullness that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the fullness of giving, of taking care of others, of fulfilling responsibilities. It was the fullness of simply existing, of being able to breathe deeply without the weight of the world pressing down on me. By the time I left Paris, I had transformed. I wasn't the same woman who had arrived unsure and hesitant. I wasn't the woman who had left behind her life of service and sacrifice. I was someone else now. I was Victoria, not just a mother or a wife, not just someone's caretaker. I was someone who had finally taken the time to rediscover herself. I was someone who was learning to live for herself, to pursue the things that made her heart beat a little faster. I had become a woman who was no longer afraid of living outside of the roles I had been given. The flight back to New York was bittersweet. I knew that returning to my life would be hard, that I would have to face the family dynamics I had left behind. But I also knew that I was different now. I wasn't the same person who had been swept up in the tide of responsibility of duty. I had learned something about myself in Paris, something I couldn't unlearn. I had learned that I didn't have to answer to anyone anymore, that I didn't have to be what others wanted me to be. I could be me for the first time in decades, and that knowledge, that strength, would carry me through the challenges ahead. When I arrived home, things weren't immediately different. The phone rang the moment I walked through the door, and I could already feel the weight of the old demands, the old expectations pressing in on me. It was Amelia. "Mom." "I've been thinking," she said, her voice tentative. "I want to apologize for everything, for making you feel like you had to be everything for me. I know now how much I took you for granted. I don't want to do that anymore." I stood there holding the phone, surprised by how easily the words rolled off my tongue. "It's okay, Amelia," I said softly. "I understand. But I need you to know something. I'm not going to be that person for you anymore. I'm not going to be the one who always picks up the pieces, who always solves your problems. I need you to take responsibility for your own life. I love you, but I also love myself enough to set boundaries." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment I wondered if I had gone too far, if I had pushed too hard. But then Amelia spoke again. "I get it. I really do, and I'm going to figure this out. I don't want to lose you, but I know I have to start standing on my own. I'm sorry, Mom. I know you'll be fine," I said. "You're stronger than you think, and you'll figure this out just like I'm figuring out how to live for myself." The conversation ended, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to check in on Amelia to ensure she was okay, to make sure everything was running smoothly. I knew she was going to be okay. She would learn just as I had learned, and I would be here for her, but not as the crutch I had once been. I would be here as a mother who had learned to set boundaries, to take care of herself, to live for herself. The weeks that followed were a mix of small victories and adjustments. I found myself reorienting my life, filling it with things I had put off for years. I went back to painting, something I had loved but abandoned long ago. I began to take long walks in the park, reading books I had left untouched for far too long. I went out with friends I hadn't seen in years, rediscovering the joy of conversation and laughter without the weight of guilt hanging over me. And most importantly, I began to see myself. Not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a caretaker, but as Victoria, a woman with dreams, with desires, with passions of her own. I was no longer just a function in someone else's life. I was me, and that was more than enough. As I stood in front of my easel brush in hand, I realized that the journey I had started in Paris had only just begun. The woman who had boarded that plane, unsure, hesitant and scared, had returned to New York as someone who was finally learning to live for herself. And I had no intention of ever going back. The future was wide open. And for the first time in my life, I was excited to step into it. As I reflect on my journey of self-discovery, the most important lesson I've learned is that we all have the power to reclaim our lives, no matter how long we've spent living for others. For years, I thought my worth was tied to how much I gave, to how well I met everyone else's expectations. But I've learned that true happiness doesn't come from constant sacrifice. It comes from finding balance, setting boundaries, and giving ourselves permission to live for ourselves without guilt. It's never too late to stop being who others need us to be and start becoming who we are meant to be. If you're feeling lost in the roles you've taken on, know this: you are more than the expectations others have placed on you. You deserve to be seen, heard, and loved just as you are. Don't wait for permission. Give it to yourself. I encourage you to take a moment today to reflect on your own journey. What parts of yourself have you neglected in the name of duty? What would it feel like to start putting yourself first, even in small ways? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and any steps you've taken toward living for yourself. You're not alone in this process, and sometimes just knowing that someone else understands can be incredibly freeing. Thank you for reading my story. If anything I've shared resonates with you, I hope it inspires you to start your own path towards self-love and fulfillment. Remember, the power to change is always within you. Take that first step and let your life be a reflection of who you truly are. Feel free to share your thoughts with me. I'm excited to hear from you.